So I sort of forgot to upload anything to YouTube for a while. And the reason for that is because of my new personal project and short film called Odyssey. And when I started this project, it just sort of consumed all my time. I got way much into it, and I saw that if I had to keep uploading videos on the side, I would never really finish this project because I kept building new ideas on top of it, and I wanted to create new scenes. And, and as someone who wants to try to up himself all the time, it just became way too big of a project. But now it's done, and I want to talk a little bit about it today. I want to talk about some of the process and show you some behind the scenes. So let's get into it. So as I said, I set out to create this new passion project. What I didn't realize was that it would develop into this monster of a project and the biggest creative challenge so far in my life. My whole process for this project wasn't exactly a linear or the most approachable process, but I guess it ended up working. And I think in the beginning when I started the project, I knew that I wanted to do a lot of sort of research and development, like in the whole process. I didn't just want to create the story and then have a super linear process. I knew that I wanted to let myself play. And when I was looking through my notes here, I found that it's something I wrote. I think it must have been in the beginning that I totally forgot about. So what I wrote was, think about giving myself space for exploration. Everything doesn't have to be under control or make sense. Try out the best parts about being an artist. Explore. And have basic themes and stories in mind as it progresses. Experiment with worlds, textures, colors, and light. Like, actually looking back at that note, I guess I did succeed in that way. So even though this wasn't like the most linear process, I did end up having a lot of fun actually creating it. So the whole creation part of it was a little bit more fun because I didn't put so many constraints on it. I was actually just trying to let the ideas flow along the process. So there was a lot of changes on the go. As I said, it ended up making the process a little bit more fun and a little bit more loose. And I learned so much from actually just exploring and not putting so many constraints on. So one of the things I wanted to do was try to blend practical shots with 3D. So see if I could do something different, or at least use especially these paint effects, because I have seen so many videos of them, and I tried to do it with like fruit coloring or food coloring, and that was a lot of fun. And you get all this organic movement and so many fun colors or shapes, and it just makes that process alone was a lot of fun. But I knew I wanted to do something with that and not just like create a small test for that, but actually using it in a bigger scale for a project. So that was a little bit of actually how it started. It was more about the exploration of using practical shots in 3D than the actual story. So in the beginning, I actually just wanted to show the feeling of playing some of these video games. So how would the brain react? And could I make up this whole visual language where one color was a special or specific emotion or something like that? So, but at some point it developed into the idea of the future archaeologist looking for answers. And I think because I didn't stick to one idea, but I actually let the story develop naturally. And together with the actual 3D creation of the universe, things started to come together. And I don't think this would have happened if I just wrote the story, or created the story, and then stuck to that all the way through. So again, not being so constrained about anything in the process, actually letting it flow. It did end up taking a lot longer because of that. There was also a tons of shots I didn't put in the film, and tons of scenes I created that was never used. So an idea, or like, I guess more of a thought experiment, that some of the things we are digging up, for example, if we're digging up something in Egypt, maybe it's just games and entertainment, but we portray it as history. So I guess that sort of thought experiment was like, what if people was actually digging our world up like 200 years from now or something like that? And all they found was all the video games, and the story of our generation would be portrayed through video games, I guess. I guess that was the thought that really sparked how the story ended up. So I started to develop these basic ideas and the basic idea for a story. And I would start to do those practical shots, and I would do some R&D in 3D and just having fun with it and exploring. And after a little bit of that, I was starting to get a sense of, okay, this is the style I want to go into, and this is where I think the story should slowly develop towards. After a little bit of time, I would then write a storyboard. So I would just write it in a text form in the beginning. And after that, I would go into Photoshop and try to draw a little bit of how I should see the scenes. And I will say that after I did this, the process became a little bit more constrained, but it also made it a lot more easy to actually know what to do. The whole storyboard just sort of works as a to-do list. Can I actually still explore inside of that? So, constraints, but still being able to explore. I think this process also worked because I didn't want a linear storyline. I guess it was a little bit more about telling a visual story while still making sure that each shot had a purpose and a reason for being there. So, having intention for each shot, but not necessarily thinking, okay, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's more like showing fragments of a story or of a world, I guess. So I had a little bit of an idea after some R&D of the style I wanted to do. So I would also gather, I did this a little bit from the beginning, started to gather tons of mood boards and or tons of reference images. And this would just develop as I was creating new scenes. So I would start to have an idea of a certain style I want to go in, and I would find even more references for that. And I think at the beginning, I was trying to force a style because of some reference images, which was a mistake, I think, because I was trying to look at the reference images and think, oh, that style is cool, let me try to do that. And then it would never look as good, or it just wouldn't feel authentic to me. I was just trying to look a little bit too much at Blade Runner or Ash Thorpe's project Awaken Akira. And I was thinking, oh my God, some of these shots were so cool, and or the lighting, all this really Blade Runner look as well, like this super foggy look. It ended up not working for me. Yeah, since I think every time I tried to force a style or tried to do the same as some cool reference, I would just end up not using the scene. Yeah, so obviously I had to do something different. But that was really also one of the bigger challenges, trying to create a style and then keep that style along the whole video. So like going in all these directions and doing all this exploration and then still trying to keep the same style. I think that was a little bit difficult, but I guess it ended up being kind of fine. Since this really wasn't a linear process or a linear story, I had to make sure that each scene was telling a story, that there really had to be a good reason for the scenes to be there. So I also ended up cutting a couple of the scenes out, because I think they were sort of just telling the same story as a couple of the other scenes, or they were just not important enough, I guess. And that's, I think I changed that almost in the end. Everything was rendered, everything was done. So again, a lot of changes on the go. But let me talk a little bit specifically about the scenes and what they meant and what's the story behind the scene. Okay, so the first couple of scenes I think are pretty important to the actual story, since it's showing that this world outside of the lab is actually a little bit broken and they have to hide. It's fairly simple, but having a little bit of broken ruins and having the stairs open up, I think it's supposed to be invisible ink. It's sort of a story inside the story. So it's these objects that are telling part of the story, if that makes sense. Moving on. Since I knew the chemicals was an important part of the story, I had to implement these hazmat suits into some of the scenes. They play the role of showing that there is something that might be of danger. Almost a character we know. And as soon as we see a suit like this, we have an idea of what's going on. It's a symbol most people will recognize. And that's why I had these. I wanted to showcase early what specific things they are researching. So another clear symbol of this would be a PlayStation controller, Xbox controller, and the WASD keys from a keyboard. This lets us know that there's something important, and almost everyone will know what these objects are within seconds of looking at them. So the next scene I want to get a little bit into is this keyboard and city scene. This is one of the earlier scenes I worked on. I had this idea in my head very early on, so I just started with that. I think that was before any of the story was really ready. I just had this idea of this scene. It's the first scene where we really go from the real world or the laboratory environment into the results of the research. I knew all of this could be a hit or miss, since shifting from the lab environment into something completely different and then back could easily throw off the viewer. But nonetheless, this felt like the right approach, so I went with my gut. If you're wondering why I didn't just build out a normal city and made it out of the keyboard, my thinking behind this was that if you're doing research on an archaeological site, let's say, the results probably won't be totally intact. And since a lot of this is digital, I was thinking that things could be glitched together, so the thing you were gaming on, or in this case a keyboard, could have been morphed together with the actual game. And I just thought that it's just, a little bit screwed up and something a little bit different. So after this, we're moving from the shooting scene into the bullet simulation. I saw this as a bit of an in-between shot, showing some sort of abstract test, but not necessarily in the laboratory. It was supposed to give the magnitude of bullets used in these games we play. And then in the end, going into the lab and showing a more simple test of bullets moving. The brain shown on these futuristic research monitors, or whatever I should call them, was to show that they are testing what the effects of these games have on the brain. I was thinking of handpicking a couple of scenes and talking about them, but I think I'm just going to run through a lot more of them. Okay, so the disc and the PlayStation shot. It shows how they are testing out what these objects are and finding out what they are showing. In this case, Assassin's Creed Origins, where we right after jump into the Egypt scene and see Anubis. A small, almost invisible Easter egg in this is the Nvidia logo hidden behind Anubis. It has a little bit of that look of this Egypt symbol, and it obviously has a lot to do with gaming. So I thought it just would be a small little fun gimmick. One of the bigger challenges was trying to tie all these scenes together. So I spoke a little bit to that earlier. There's so many different styles and so many different worlds. Trying to tie them all together is a little bit of a challenge. But I was thinking, how could I actually do this? I came up with that I could do with colors, lighting, objects, and themes. So in the beginning, when I had the storyboard, I would try to imagine what the scenes would look like and pushing the scenes around in boards to have an order that would confuse as little as possible. The scene where we go from the Egypt scene into seeing the PS4 controller, the lighting plays an important role, both in color and movement, to tie this a little bit together. After this scene, the mood changes quite a bit. So to tie this a little bit together, my thoughts was that a PS4 controller and an Xbox controller are in the same category, so there's a connection. And with all that said, it might not come through in the end, but there's a means to the madness. Intentional choices were made. Okay, so we go from this Xbox controller and cables hooked up to it and hooked into this prototype cyborg-looking thing. The idea is here that it's the early stages on trying to either build or test out things on an artificial human. To transition from the cyborg shot, we see it infused with chemicals, and the scenes changes into close-ups of these chemicals. The next scenes are a bunch of shots revealing experiments and extractions on some of the excavated material. In this case, snippets from a couple of famous games. The next scenes is one of those where I really battled with the look of it. Let me explain. I knew I wanted to showcase this detective kind of board. You know, the ones we always see in movies. So the viewers could quickly read the scene and know that this is sort of the room where they are trying to piece together the story. The problem was that this is supposed to be in the future, and using yarn to connect the dots probably wouldn't cut it. So what I did in the beginning was to have red lasers instead of yarn, but I ended up not really liking the look. So I had to figure out another way to show this as like a digital board. The simple approach I went with: turns on and then it animates. Again, one of those scenes where I'm not totally sure that the message comes across, but oh well, I could dwell on these things forever. In the end of the detective board scene, there's a couple of clues to what comes right after. The actual pirate ship scene is here in a sort of glitched form, and Assassin's Creed Black Flag is here too. I have to say I'm a big fan of pirates and stories about them. So this was a little bit forced into the film because I wanted to create a scene with pirate ships. I just thought that was a pretty fun challenge, and it also turned out to be a good challenge. But it also did make sense with the video games and Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Uncharted, of course. So after this, there's the cannon shot that transitions into the brain. I think it is a little bit on the nose, but to be honest, it was quite literally the idea that some of these games are mind-blowing. Such a high level of storytelling, craftsmanship, and dedication. So I was thinking, how do you visually show something being mind-blown? So these scenes are fairly self-explanatory. They're really just sort of a collection of important objects the research team has found. And as they find them, they get stored digitally in this shelf kind of thing. Which is why I wanted to animate them being revealed, so it didn't seem like physical objects necessarily. I'm not totally happy with these shots, but it got to a point where I just had to move on and just accept the scenes. While doing research on my previous project, Genghis Khan title sequence, I read a couple of interviews with Patrick Clare, one of the, if not the main guy behind some of my favorite title sequences. There was a thing he said about these symbols that we respond to. I think it was about American gods. different profits, guards, organizations, and so on have these symbols we have an immediate reaction to. So I had this in my mind as I created the shelf shot. There's a lot of known symbols from these games. They might be subtle, but we know them just like we know the Apple logo or Jesus on a cross. There's the ones where I show the snippets of the labels and from the detective board. Then there's Assassin's Creed CD, but the most obvious ones, if you know these two games, both developed by Naughty Dog, it's probably my two favorite games of all time, Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us 1. I thought it would be cool to recreate the main menu screens and tie them together. Again, a creative challenge, but it still made sense to the story. And as I said earlier, the results they would find might be glitched together and things might not show up as they actually will do in the games, which is also why there's this fire theme instead of just daylight. The last scenes is where all of the information and the results the researchers have extracted goes into this chemical life form that is infused into this artificial human. The idea here is, with all this information from the research, can we say something about what kind of human would have lived back then? Okay, so that was almost every scene. That wasn't really the plan to talk about everything, but there you go. I will be doing some smaller videos about a little bit more of the specific, for example, my 3D workflow for a couple of the scenes maybe, and my After Effects, Post Effects workflow. And I will definitely create a video where I talk a little bit about the practical shots or using the real footage and blending it with the 3D and how that came about and how it was done. But thanks so much for watching. I hope that you really enjoyed this and that maybe some of this was actually helpful and that you got an idea about my process and how I worked. I can't say how I work because this is not usually how I work. This was a little bit of a messy process, but it was a lot of fun to create. And I knew that I wanted to do some behind the scenes for this. Yeah, as I said, I hope it was helpful and there was some enjoyment or that you maybe learned a thing or two. Thank you and see you in the next one.